Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be taking a look at TAL Vocoder, but also have a look at generally how you apply a vocoder, because it's certainly something which I know has been a source of confusion for people who I've worked with in the past. So in addition to looking at the new features in this latest version of TAL Vocoder, we're also going to just have a general look at how you apply a vocoder so you can get started if that's what you need to do. On screen, you can see the TAL page with the TAL Vocoder, and there's a number of updates for this. It's got new routing possibilities, etc., and a scalable user interface, which is becoming increasingly important. It's still free. It's still a great little tool. So download the version you need, get it installed, and then head over to your DAW, which in my case is going to be Cubase. So here we are in Cubase, and first things first, what may surprise you is that the vocoder is an audio effect. It's not an instrument, so you won't find it under your instruments. You will need to insert it on an audio track. And when you do so here I've got this little bit of electric piano from Loopmaster's sample pack, I believe. As soon as you put the TAL vocoder on, what will you find? Suddenly you get no audio. And the reason for this is in the default mode, what you need to do is to send it some MIDI. So here I've got a MIDI track. And in this particular one, you can see I've got it sent to the MIDI input of the vocoder. So without that, it won't work. So now if I play this and I play a key on the keyboard, you get the vocoder actually working. So that's the initial setup. This is often a stumbling block or indeed a complete end of the journey point for many people. So once you've got that set up, then you can start playing around with the vocoder itself, and that's what we're going to take a look at now. So first things first, slightly confusingly, it's called TAL Vocoder 2, even though it's version 3, so that may confuse you when you first try and load it up. It's got a few presets which we're going to have a look at. So I'm just going to load up Cozy Voice. We go back to a sane position. And most importantly, it's got a resizable user interface, which is quite nice. There's a weird thing that certainly I've noticed on my Mac. If I resize the window from the top, it will scroll down and become even possibly infinitely tiny. But bringing it back up doesn't bring it back. I'm not sure whether that's intentional, but it is easily fixed. So we're going to leave it nice and big because after all, that's the main focus of this video. So we've got two sections. We've got the carrier. So this is effectively a simple MIDI synth, which is being played by the MIDI. So that's why we need to send it MIDI in this particular mode. And then we've got the vocoder. So this is what's processing the audio based on the audio that's passing through it. So that's the modulator, and the carrier, which is the synth sound. So we're just going to put it on a few examples, and then we're going to look at what all the controls do, because this is a plugin with a lot of controls, and often people see this and just be completely bewildered by it. So let's just have a listen to some of the sounds, and then we'll break down what it's actually doing. So here I've just got this little Rhodes part in the background. So if I play that and play on the keyboard, we get no sound, and that's because this is not in focus. So one way around this, to get over this obvious problem, particularly in Cubase, is if you put monitor on, then regardless of which track I have in focus, the MIDI will get through. We can see the MIDI's getting through there, whereas when it's not, I need to have this track in focus, which is easily changed to something else when you're playing around in a session. So if you want to keep that, you can just do that on monitor, and then we can see it's getting through, but it will get through regardless of which track I have in focus. So that can be useful. Once you've done that, so this is the Cozy Voice on that Rhodes part. So we can see that the rhythm of the sound of this is coming through, but the notes are totally being generated by what I'm playing on the keyboard. So I can play a chord. It's got some weird tuning in there, so we'll move on to another preset. Let's go for Flying Voice, which is a little more straightforward. And you can hear that regardless of the key that this original part is in, there are enough harmonics present for anything that I play on the keyboard to come out. There could be some exceptions if we had a particularly unusual piece of audio being played, but generally that would be the case. I can demonstrate that further by having a quick listen to this next sample. So this is a drum sample. Get the idea with that. And if we now put the vocoder back on and play it. So you wouldn't think those frequencies are present in there, but they're present enough for this to be able to work. And of course, we've got the classic thing with a voice. So in this case, the sample in question, again, it's another Steinberg sample. I think it's the Bloom sample pack, which I think came with Cubase 11.
I never trade a single moment.
And then we put the vocoder back on. I'm just going to play a single note. I never trade a single moment. So you can hear that coming through. So that's the general thing with the vocoder, but there are some other presets, but there's not a huge range of them. There's 7 of them there, so they wouldn't take too long to go through. So once you've got set up, I'll leave you to go through those. But what we're going to look at next in the next section of the video is have a look at the controls of the vocoder to get a bit more of a grasp of what's going on and how you can fine tune this. So to get an idea of what the vocoder is actually doing, what I've got is a sample of some white noise. You may see it says white noise 2 minutes there. I'm just going to make this just a little bigger so we get as much vocoder as we can on screen. In fact, let's go all the way up there. We don't really need to see what's behind. So we're just going to have that playing in the background. So that white noise is going to be fairly constant. So that means we should have much more of a chance of hearing what the controls on the vocoder are doing because all the frequencies are pretty much present in that white noise. So if I play that and then play a note, we can hear that. Sounds like a terrible organ, etc. But now we can spend a bit of time working out what all these do. So if we put the pulse all the way up, put the saw and the noise down, you can double click these to take them to 0. So taking that tune to 0, etc. So there's our pulse waveform going through here. Now I'm also going to turn down the S and the harmonic. And now you can hear much more that pulse sound. So although we don't get to hear it exactly, that sounds much more like it. And let's really flatten things out. Just 0 all this out. There we go. Now if we put the saw up and the pulse down, bit of sawtooth sound, get our sub. You can hear that lower, again, sounding pretty square wavy. And finally noise, so noise modulating noise. I think what we'll get is noise, but it's kind of wobbly noise. But there we go, that's what you'd expect. Now we've got some tuning for our pulse and saw wave. So if we just take the noise down, we'll put both of these on 5. So we can tune it down 2 octaves or up to 2. Classic sort of fifths kind of sound that you get in there. And we've also got fine tune as well. So even if these are in tune, we can have a bit of wobbliness between them. All fairly plain fare so far. Now, what is more interesting, I think, if you want to simulate the kind of classic vocoder sounds, is to take it off of poly mode. So this will now only play single notes at a time. So you can see I'm playing a chord, but it's whichever note I played last is the one that you're hearing. And then put in some portamento time, because then you're going to get smooth glides between notes. Make it a little longer. So if your notes don't overlap like this, it goes there instantly. But if they do overlap, they will slide to and fro, which can be a pretty nice effect. Obviously, we've got transpose and tune as well. And finally, you can sync this, which syncs these three together. So you get a slightly different effect because of the way that if they're retuned, they restart. So we get a different effect. You can hear how that sounds compared to... So there it is retuning, whereas there, because it's synced, it's being restarted. So you get quite a different effect from that. They don't actually go out of tune. So that's the carrier section. Next, let's take a look at the vocoder, the modulator section of the vocoder, and look at what we can do in there. So in the vocoder section, we've got this, what looks like a graphic equalizer. Now, this particular vocoder has got 11 bands. So it basically has 11 bands of frequency, which are triggered by the signal here and allow the modulator frequency to come through. And we can see in the background that modulator is still going. So this is the white noise. If I hit stop in Cubase, you see that stops. Otherwise, it's just going to keep playing. So I'm leaving it playing in the background. Now, some of these do actually affect the sound here effectively. So first things first, we've got this modulator level. So if I change that, it's just controlling the overall level. Now, the other thing we've got is a compander. So this is a compressor and an expander. So you'd hear that on the drum part where we've got level changes, and this will basically even things out. So if you're getting too much level change in your modulator signal, just wang this up and it will really flatten it out. It's got quite a nice sound to it, actually. So let's just go back to hear that. So here I've got it on the drums. So you can see that's going there. So you can hear there's much more dynamic in there. Whereas there, it's bringing up the low levels and crushing down the high levels. Really, it's compressing and expanding at the same time. So it's got quite a nice sound to it. I think that's quite useful in a few situations. Let's switch back to the white noise. And the rest of these are for the carrier. So we've got the carrier input level, which, as you can imagine, controls the carrier input, which is similar to the modulation input in terms of level control. And then we've got this. So this adds in some S sound. So this will allow you to control the tone. So if this tone hasn't got that kind of sound in there, this adds in. You can really hear this on the white noise. So you can hear it's hitting that. So if you've ever got a sound which doesn't sound clear and you can't hear the vocal coming through, by adding this S sound in, it will make it much more intelligible. So that can be pretty useful there. So let's go back to the voice sample and hear the effect on that. So there, it's kind of intelligible. Whereas if I get rid of that, it sounds much more limited, much more like the Vocoder, etc. The release. So this is the release of the filters. So each one of these filters is controlled by an envelope, and this release control controls how quickly each frequency gets cut off. So if we play this on the voice again, so you can hear that really ringing on. Now this is a bit more pronounced on the drum part because obviously this has got some fairly significant dynamics happening in there. So if we play this on that, I'll start off with the release at 0. So there you can hear that tone is almost constant because the release has been increased enough. And these, I find that these tend to interreact because the S will tend to bring that up. So if I bring this up here, you'll find probably around the sort of 2 o'clock position, it becomes fairly extreme. So that has a bit of an effect on that. And finally, we've got harmonics. So this adds in some harmonics into the carrier sound as well. And again, playing this on the drums, I'm going to turn the release back down. Sounds slightly detuned, but it's actually adding in some harmonics in there, making it a much richer sound. And if we put that on the voice, you'll really hear the difference between the two. So bringing the harmonic all the way down. So bringing the S in as well. Now it's much more intelligible. So fine-tuning those is definitely something you need to do, particularly if you're looking for a voice that you can actually understand what's being said. So another control is the frequency sliders. So this just controls the level of each one of these frequencies. You can reset them to 0 by double-clicking them, or you can just drag them to wherever you want. So this, for instance, will reduce all the bottom end. You can reduce the top end by removing these higher frequency ones, etc. And then you get a kind of really notchy sound, which is vaguely reminiscent of the Vocoder, the thing which I think pre-World War II everyone felt was alive because it was effectively a vocoder and it looked magical. I think it was in probably in the 1930s. It certainly looked very Art Deco, the picture that I saw of it many, many moons ago. So this just allows you to fine-tune those and pick the frequency response. And it's quite nice because you can bring in lower frequencies, should they be present in what you're doing, in any balance you want, etc. And obviously that will interact with other controls as well. Finally, before we look at the input mode, we've got the chorus. So this is a nice little chorus effect. So it really brings that out with it on. So if you're looking for a rich sound, you can do it all in one box rather than having to play around. So the final area we want to look at is the input mode, which is one of the newer things in this particular revision of TAL Vocoder. So in the next section, we'll just take a look at that and some of the possibilities it gives you. So far, we've been using this in the default mode, which is the carrier is controlled by MIDI, i.e. when you play a note, this is a synth which generates some sound which comes through the carrier. And then the audio track is the modulator. But we're not limited to that anymore. So you can, with older vocoders, you can change what you put into them via manual routing, etc. But in this case, we can change it. So we could put our audio over the sidechain. So here, in this particular setup, I'm just going to reduce the size so we can see what we're doing at the same time. So on this particular track, I've got these samples which I've used, they're just doubled below. So you can see on this original audio track, we've got that. So first thing I need to do in Keybase is to set up sidechain. So I'm going to activate it here, press the cog, and then I'm going to add original audio as my sidechain source, and I'm going to put it onto pre-fader so we don't have to hear it. So even though it's not muted, the volume is turned down, so you can see here it's turned down, and because it's on a pre-send, we will still get the audio through. If we set the locators around that, in this mode where we've got the carrier being done from the MIDI and the sidechain is the modulator, that to us in this point is no different because we've got the same audio on these. So we would have some flexibility if we needed to, but it doesn't make that much difference. Obviously, if you're doing something where maybe you're bypassing the vocoder and you want to send something different in, but still have this audio pass through, etc., that kind of thing, maybe there's a routing situation where that may be useful, but this is just sort of convenient rather than really changing the way it works. What does change the way it works is that you can have the sidechain being the carrier signal and the audio being the modulator signal. So here, instead of the carrier coming from here, the carrier is going to come from the sidechain. So at the moment, we've got the same thing coming through. So you're getting this controlled by itself, but it's going to be vocoded. So you get some processing, and this is definitely something where you could experiment a fair bit to just get a new kind of processing. Now, as ever with this, we need to be careful with the volume, so I'm just going to bring that down. But you can hear it sounds different. Got a chorus on, etc., but you can hear these different ones. Now, what's interesting is that the input mode is part of the preset, so if you've been doing it like that, you'll need to change it over. So there's some interest in there, but it's probably fairly limited because you're effectively just doing some filtering. You might find some interesting stuff with timing of releases, etc. So if we put it onto the drums filter by themselves again. So here we've got that drum loop filtered through itself. And if we bring in the S's, you start hearing hats, sort of cymbal frequencies come through. We bring the release up. We get sort of room sound in there, etc. And bringing in the compounder, it's going to hit it pretty hard, I would imagine. So again, there's sort of lo-fi processing capacity in there, but it's really going to depend on your source material and particularly what you're into doing. Now, of course, then you can tailor this with the different frequencies here, so we can just bring bottom end out, etc. We'll just notch part of it out. So, there certainly are some interesting things you can do if you want to go for sort of lo-fi kind of sounds. And finally, we'll have the vocal modulated by itself.
Never trade a single moment.
So again, you just get a kind of lo-fi version of it. And if we turn this down, etc., maybe we'll get something a little weirder.
I never trade a single moment.
So it's not super interesting, but I think what can be interesting with this is where you modulate something with something else. So let's not do that with itself, but let's do it with a drum loop. So here's a different drum loop. Let's see what we get here. Now, in this case, because of what's going on, we're not getting an enormous amount, so we might need to... So the drums are really following the dynamics of the track. You would have no idea. Apart from on that opening bit here, maybe there was a bit of voice in there, but it's certainly a little bit weird. But what probably works better most of the time is when you get one drum loop being modulated by another. Let's set that up here. So you wouldn't think you were listening to what is a pretty full-on drum loop because we're modulating it with this other one, which we're really hearing the sound of. And then again, we can play around with these. This will really bring out the hi-hat. So I think for this sort of thing, modulating audio with audio, it's generally, I'd say it falls in the sort of experimental lo-fi kind of category. You can get some interesting things in there, but they're all much of a muchness to my ears. The final mode just switches those round, so it's just swapping the audio and sidechain paths, so you won't get anything drastically different. You'll just be doing one with the other. But overall, this gives you the kind of flexibility you need. Once you get started with this, I think you'll be able to go pretty well. So the final few things, the interface, as we've already seen, is resizable. you've got presets. So the way the presets are done is quite nice because they're just based on a file hierarchy. So they're just in folders. So you can copy them to another machine, etc. So let's say you've decided you've created the greatest sound ever, etc. We'll just flick a few things around. Just click that, and then we can put them anywhere. You can put them in a new folder. So here I've just made a DJ presets folder. And as soon as you change these, they're represented in the vocoder. So if you move those around, as soon as you click this menu, it will be the current status of it, which is pretty nice. That's quite nice. And another nice touch is you've got the show presets folder. So you just click that and it takes you straight there. So you can manage them here. And say, if I delete this and then go back to there, we'll see straight away it's disappeared from here, never to be seen again. So that's the TAL Vocoder. So overall, I think this is a good vocoder. If you need a vocoder and you don't want to pay for one, because there are a few paid options, this is a pretty good choice. Vocoder, you know what you're going to get with it. The main thing with it is typically they're moderately difficult to set up. So either you use them as an instrument, you have to pass audio through them, or in this case, they are an audio effect, but you have to send either MIDI or some different audio to them. Hopefully we've covered that in enough detail for you to be able to get started, and then you can start playing around with all the controls. But it gives you probably as many controls as certainly any vocoder that I've spent much time playing around with. You've always got the option to send a different synth into it, which is quite nice because this obviously isn't a fantastic synth. So you could always set up a separate instrument. There's plenty you can do with this. It's not limited by what this can do, whereas some other vocoders, that is the case. And the addition of scalable user interface and the flexibility here with the audio routing makes it certainly as good as a free vocoder as I've seen anywhere. As ever, I hope you found that useful, and we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.